My name's Eli Martinez. I'm 27, a social worker, and I took a job in one of those Indiana towns that ended up on the wrong side of globalization. This is not just a recession. This area is dying. Entire neighborhoods swallowed by rust and rot. People talk about the good years like folklore, when the steel mills and abattoirs ran day and night, when freight trains rattled through town carrying more than just graffiti and memories. Now the rail lines are choked with weeds, and the old warehouses lean like drunks into the wind. Chain-link fences hang open, flapping in the breeze like forgotten flags. Burned-out cars sit like shrines at the ends of overgrown cul-de-sacs. The buildings here have long since been gutted, windows busted out, parking lots cracked wide open like a dried riverbed, and stray dogs everywhere, hundreds of them. Mangy, hungry, half-feral things that roam the streets in loose, shifting packs. Some used to belong to someone once. Now they skulk in the shadows, fight over trash, and howl at night like they remember being loved. You see them everywhere out here, as much a part of the landscape as the rust, but there are still people here, and kids, lost souls trying to navigate a world that already gave up on them, hustling, scraping by, hoping someone will look their way and not just see another lost cause. They walk past the ruins every day, past the broken windows and rusting metal, past the packs of strays that growl when you get too close, and they carry all of it on their shoulders like it's normal. And maybe for them it is, but that's why I'm here. Because even in a place like this, there's still something worth fighting for. Still a chance if someone's willing to put in the effort. I run a youth diversion program out of a squat brick building near a large abandoned strip mall. We're wedged between a payday loan office and a liquor store with bars on the windows. The work is hard, long hours, lots of frustration. Some days we get through to the kids. Most days I'm not so sure. But I keep trying. Someone has to. Last week, during check-ins, I sat across from the two teens I've gotten closest to in the program, Sasha and Javvon. They're not friends exactly, but they orbit the same chaotic gravity. Sasha's 17, lean, wiry, always dressed in layers even when it's hot. She always moves like she expects a fight, like she's already halfway to her next exit. Eyes too sharp for her age, like she's seen more than she should have. She doesn't talk much, and when she does, it's laced with sarcasm sharp enough to draw blood. But Sasha is smart. Not the kind of smart that gets grades, but the kind that keeps you alive. She reads people fast, trusts no one until they've earned it, and knows how to disappear when trouble's coming. A natural survivor. If anyone around here has a real shot at turning their life around, it's her. Javvon's younger, 16, but louder, cockier. Always trying to puff himself up to match the world he thinks he's supposed to impress. He's got that restless energy, like if he sits still too long, he'll explode. There's a recklessness to him, a need to prove he's tough, fearless, that he won't be pushed around. He throws himself into danger without thinking, just to show off. Has been arrested twice this year, for petty theft and breaking into an auto shop. But behind all that bluster, he too is a smart kid with potential. Smarter than he lets on. That's what worries me. Because I've seen kids like Javvon before, sharp enough to make it out, angry enough to throw it all away. I'm scared I'm going to lose him to a gang before he ever gets the chance to figure out who he could have been. Anyway, I was trying to build some sort of connection with the two teenagers. I asked if they'd been near the old strip mall recently, just making conversation, trying to gauge how they were doing, if they needed help with anything. But the second I mentioned that old strip mall, the vibe in the room shifted instantly. Sasha stiffened. She kept her head low, arms wound around herself like she was holding something inside. "Don't go there. Don't even talk about it," she muttered. "There's some kind of freak in there. People say he kills and eats the stray dogs, and maybe even people too. And we've heard strange noises coming from there at night." Javvon tried to brush it off, cracking a joke about junkies or feral dogs, but even he seemed genuinely shaken. His knee bounced under the table. His fingers tapped. There's something raw about fear when it's real. You can smell it, like blood in the water. And I knew right then, whatever they saw, it wasn't just a bad trip or a street rumor. It had gotten under their skin. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. But either way, I knew I'd end up going to see it for myself. Curiosity's a hard thing to shake, especially in my line of work. If someone was hiding out in that abandoned mall, living off scraps and suffering from some sort of mental disease, they needed help. And it seemed that I was the only one who cared. I cracked a smile, trying to lighten the tension between us. All right, how about this? You two help me find him. We won't get close, just a little recon mission. I tapped the table like we were planning something exciting instead of something probably very stupid. Javvon's eyebrows shot up. Man, you crazy, he said. But there was a spark of defiance there, a flash of that reckless pride he always carried. He wanted to prove he wasn't scared, especially in front of Sasha. Sasha shook her head, pulling her hoodie tighter around herself, but she didn't say no. For me, it was as much about helping whoever was out there as it was about earning the two kids' trust, maybe even teaching them a different way to be brave. It was late afternoon when we made our way toward the old strip mall. From a distance, the complex sprawled like a dying animal across the cracked asphalt, massive, decaying, and silent. Half the windows were smashed out, the others so caked in grime they looked like blacked-out eyes. The brick walls sagged and bulged. Rusted steel beams jutted from collapsed awnings like broken ribs. Torn banners still clung to the walls, advertising sales that ended 20 years ago. The whole place reeked of despair. Every gust of wind carried the smell of mold, old urine, and something worse, something sweet and rotting, like meat left out too long. Javvon swaggered at first, throwing his shoulders back, walking with a cocky strut that didn't fool anyone. The closer we got, the smaller he seemed to get inside that tough act. His hands stayed jammed deep into the pockets of his hoodie, fists clenched tight. Sasha walked a few steps behind us, silent and tense, her eyes never stopping their restless scan of the shadows. The two kids were afraid of something. And me? I felt it too, the wrongness of the place. But I shook it off. Fear wasn't going to help anyone, and it wasn't justified. It was just an abandoned mall, nothing more. We made our way to what had once been the main entrance. A few shards of glass still clung stubbornly to the frame, but the double doors hung open, crooked and inviting. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped a few degrees. The smell of rot was a bit stronger here, though still just faint enough to ignore if you tried. We walked down the main corridor in silence, our footsteps faintly echoing off the cracked tiles and graffiti-smeared walls. Metal gates hung half-closed over hollow storefronts, and the overhead lights, long since dead, swayed slightly with each gust of stale wind. My eyes swept every corner, every shadow. Sasha and Javvon did the same, scanning the ruins with wide, wary eyes. It seemed that we were completely alone in here. Javvon was the first to spot it. He stopped short, muttering, "Yo, what the hell?" and pointed toward the shattered remains of an old storefront. Lying just beyond the broken glass was a skull, small, canine. It was gnawed and scarred, riddled with deep, uneven bite marks along the crown and jaw. Bits of brittle fur and leathery skin still clung stubbornly to the bone, giving it a half-mummified look. Sasha pressed a hand over her mouth, turning her face away. Javvon tried to scoff, but the sound came out thin and hollow. I crouched down, studying the skull. A nasty sight, yeah, but nothing you wouldn't expect out here. Feral dogs fought all the time, over territory, over scraps or mating rights. I heard it every night, growling, howling, sometimes the sharp yelp of something losing a fight. I forced a smile and stood up. "Just dogs," I said, brushing the dust off my jeans. "It's rough out here. There are just too many of them. Fights happen all the time." Javvon nodded too fast, eager to agree. Sasha said nothing, just kept glancing into the gloom like she was expecting to see something moving. And me? I kept telling myself it was nothing, just stray dogs doing what stray dogs do. A few storefronts down, tucked behind a collapsed gate, we found something else. The smell hit us first, a sharp, stomach-turning stench of rotten meat mixed with the sour bite of old urine. I fought back the urge to gag as I leaned in for a better look. I took shallow breaths through my mouth and glanced into the dim space. In the far corner, just beyond an old counter, I spotted it. Torn tarps, flattened cardboard, and an old, stained mattress slumped against the wall, half sunken into filth and darkness. I stepped closer, careful where I put my feet. The mattress was dark with age, but newer stains stood out, black and red, soaked deep into the fabric. Dried and crusted now, but unmistakable. Homeless camp, I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I wanted to believe it. People slept wherever they could around here. Got hurt, bled. It happened. But how could a human being live with this stench? There was more. Scattered around the mattress, half buried under shredded rags and trash, were animal bones. Some were clean, some still greasy with old rot. But most were broken open, splintered, and gnawed. Whoever or whatever had done this had gone after the marrow, splitting the bones to suck out every last scrap of it. Feral dogs, I thought again. I wanted to believe it, needed to, but dogs didn't arrange mattresses or pile up tarps and clothes like some sad parody of a home. Javvon, now standing beside me, muttered something I couldn't hear. Sasha stayed back, kept scanning the corridor outside, like she expected it to move. I started wondering if maybe this excursion was a mistake. Before I could pull my thoughts together, a clatter echoed down the corridor, a sharp scuffle, followed by the sound of claws scrabbling on tile. All three of us stiffened. I moved toward the broken doorway, heart hammering harder than it should. Sasha stayed behind me, clutching her hoodie tight around her frame. Down the main corridor, two large strays loped into view. Dirty, muscular mutts, scarred from countless fights, ribs showing through patchy fur. They paused when they saw us, hackles rising, their teeth bared in silent warning. Javvon let out a breath he must have been holding. "Just dogs," he muttered, like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. For a moment, the fear ebbed, replaced by something almost normal. Dangerous, sure, but explainable. Both dogs growled low, their yellowed eyes locked onto us. They moved slowly, stiff-legged, hackles raised as they advanced a few careful steps in our direction. I swallowed hard. This could get ugly. Then it happened. So fast I barely registered it. A shape, tall, dark, and impossibly fast, shot out from the shadows. I caught a glimpse of something long and furred. An arm, maybe, grabbing the hind leg of the bigger dog. The animal let out a shrill, panicked yelp, scrabbling madly at the tiles. But it didn't matter. Whatever had grabbed it yanked it off its feet in an instant, dragging it into the darkness with a wet, scraping sound. The other dog bolted immediately, claws skittering across the floor as it vanished into the gloom. Sasha gasped and stumbled back. Javvon just stood there, mouth hanging open. And me? I felt my whole body lock up. My brain refused to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. We listened, frozen, as the animal was dragged farther into the unseen corridors, its horrible screams growing sharper, more frantic, more desperate, until finally they choked off into a wet, rattling gurgle. I still hear those screams in my nightmares. Then silence. I stayed crouched low, motioning for Sasha and Javvon to stay back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity, stupid, stubborn curiosity, dragged me forward. I inched closer to the entrance of the branching side corridor, careful to stay in the center of the main walkway. My heart slammed against my ribs as I peered into the dark hallway. In the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving. It looked like a man, tall, broad-shouldered, but hunched. But the way it moved was wrong. It shifted, almost swaying, its outline trembling at the edge of the shadows. I blinked hard, squinted. Was it just my mind playing tricks in the half-light? No, someone was standing there. Before I could stop myself, the words slipped out, soft, steady, trying not to scare whoever or whatever was out there. "Hey," I called. "You all right? We're not here to hurt you." The figure froze the moment my words reached it. The slow, swaying motion stopped mid-shift, locking into a grotesque stillness. A beat passed. 2. I took a step forward, straining to see better. No response, no sound, just that faint, unmoving shape in the darkness. The silence stretched too long. I took another step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Trying to keep my voice steady, I called out again. "It's okay. I'm here to help you." My words echoed faintly down the ruined corridor, swallowed quickly by the gloom. The figure didn't move. It just lingered there, as if weighing the sound of my voice. That's when I heard something I didn't expect. A low, rattling sound, half breath, half growl, rumbled out from the corridor. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it certainly wasn't human. The thing in the shadows shifted slightly, a twitch or a tremble I couldn't read. Javvon whispered a sharp curse under his breath. Sasha pressed herself against him, her eyes wide and glassy. My subconscious screamed at me this was wrong. We needed to leave. Now. The figure twitched again, and for a heartbeat I thought it was coming for us. Instead, it slipped deeper into the corridor, melting back into the shadows quietly. But before it vanished entirely, a sharp, guttural sound, like a growl dragged across broken glass, echoed down the hallway. A warning. A cold sweat broke out along my spine. Sasha tugged urgently at my sleeve. Javvon whispered, "Eli, man, we gotta go." And for once, I didn't try to argue. Whatever that thing was, it didn't want us here. And I wasn't ready to risk the kids' lives just to satisfy my stupid conscience. I nodded once, sharp and small, and we began to back away. Slow and careful, trying not to make a sound. Every broken tile underfoot seemed to crack like a gunshot. Every breath felt too loud. I kept glancing back toward the dark side corridor, half expecting to see that shape charging out of it. But the shadows stayed still, silent, watching. We didn't run. No reason to panic. We just eased back the way we came, praying we could reach the exit before the thing changed its mind. We were almost back at the main entrance when a sound echoed behind us, a low, drawn-out moan, turning into a howl, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was long, mournful, and vibrating with something deeper than rage, something broken. We all froze for a second, shaken to the bone, before instinct kicked in. "Let's move," I hissed. We rushed the last few yards, sprinting out into the cracked parking lot, into the fading light. We didn't stop until we were halfway across the crumbling asphalt, exhausted and gasping for air. The late afternoon sun felt harsh and unreal against my skin. Sasha doubled over, hands on her knees. Javvon paced in tight, agitated circles, muttering to himself. "Man, I think that was a werewolf," he said under his breath, half to me, half to himself. "Had to be. Nothing else moves like that, sounds like that." His voice trembled a little, but he kept pacing, as if he stopped moving. The fear would catch up and crush him. I looked back at the gaping mall entrance one last time. Nothing followed. Nothing showed itself. "It wasn't a werewolf," I said, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. "There's no such thing." But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow, empty, because deep down, I knew, whatever we had seen inside that mall, it wasn't any kind of sick, desperate human being. It could have been a black bear. They were rare around here, but not unheard of. Could kill a dog, no question. And bears can stand upright. It was a rational explanation I could cling to, but even that didn't sit right in my gut. Black bears don't howl. Nothing howls like that, and the silhouette just wasn't right. We stood there a long minute, catching our breath, none of us quite willing to speak first. Finally, Javvon shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered, "I'm out of here. And don't even try saying that was a bear. That was no bear." Sasha, still pale and shaking, nodded in agreement without saying a word. Then Javvon turned and headed off down the cracked sidewalk without another glance back. Sasha lingered a moment longer, staring at me, her eyes wide and searching, looking for something, reassurance maybe, or some other explanation that would make more sense. I opened my mouth, but no words came. After a few seconds, she dropped her gaze, turned without a word, and followed Javvon. I stayed for a few more seconds, staring at the dark, gaping maw of the mall. The next afternoon, I was back in my office, sorting through paperwork and trying to focus on anything but the night before, when I heard a sharp knock on the door. Sasha stood there, pale and jittery, her eyes wide with something close to panic. "Can I come in?" she asked, already stepping inside without waiting for an answer. I nodded and pushed the papers aside. "What's wrong?" She didn't sit. She just hovered near the doorway, arms crossed tight across her chest. "Javvon," she said. "He and his brother, they're going back to the mall tonight." I frowned. "Why?" I asked. "Because Javvon's stupid," she snapped, her voice cracking. "He told his brother what we saw, and now they think they're gonna kill it. The werewolf or whatever. I think they're bringing guns," she said. "His brother's an idiot, always trying to be the bad boy, and now he's out for blood." I felt my stomach turn cold. A bunch of street thugs were going after an unknown creature in an abandoned mall at night with guns. This wasn't going to end well. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding with a sick mixture of fear and urgency. As we reached my car, Sasha yanked the passenger door open like she was afraid I'd leave without her. "You're not coming," I said, planting myself between her and the car. "I can't drag you into this. It's too dangerous." Sasha crossed her arms, defiant. "He won't listen to you. You know that." I hesitated, jaw tight. She wasn't wrong. Javvon would never back down in front of his brother and the gang just because I tell him to. But Sasha? If there was anyone who could reach him, it was her. He had a thing for her. That was blatantly obvious. "Get in," I said finally, not seeing any other option. She nodded once, hard and determined. The sun was gone by the time we reached the cracked service road leading to the strip mall. Sodium streetlights cast an amber glow over the empty parking lot, their flicker making the shadows seem to twitch. I cut the headlights well before we got close, letting the dark swallow us. The building loomed ahead like a half-dead thing, its jagged roofline hunched against the night sky. Even from here, the air carried that smell again, wet concrete and something sweet, almost metallic. We slipped out of the car and began walking toward the entrance, Sasha close behind me, both of us moving low and quiet. Every step on the broken asphalt seemed to crack like glass in the still night, the sound unnervingly loud in my ears. We skirted the edge of the lot, past the hollow storefronts with their shattered windows and sagging awnings, until we stood in front of the massive foyer, its glass doors broken, the gaping mouth framed by rusted steel and peeling paint. The darkness inside looked thick enough to touch, and a gust of cool, foul air drifted out to meet us. Both of us swallowed audibly, as if bracing ourselves before stepping over an unseen threshold. Inside, the air was cooler, heavier. My tactical flashlight cut a sharp white cone through the gloom, every jitter of my hand making the shadows dance over cracked tile and peeling paint. Beside me, Sasha held up her phone, the weak bluish torchlight barely pushing back the dark, leaving more shadow than clarity. I led us straight to the side corridor, where the dog had been dragged away days earlier, our mismatched beams crawling over the walls until mine caught the far end. The mall seemed empty. We couldn't hear a sound. So far, so good. We stepped cautiously into the narrow side corridor, the air growing colder and heavier with each footfall. Our lights swept across the floor, catching dark, red stains and tufts of matted fur still clinging to the tiles, remnants of the violent scene that we witnessed earlier that day. I remembered the sounds, that awful crunch just before the dog went silent. The memory tightened something in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going. At the end of the corridor was a battered metal door, warped and twisted with enormous force, hanging loosely to the side as if something had forced its way through. Jagged edges of rusted steel caught the light, and the gap beyond yawned like a wound in the wall. The door led to a narrow concrete staircase leading down into the basement. The smell rising from the stairwell was thick enough to taste: mildew, urine, and something much more concerning: rotten meat. Each step made my skin prickle, the animal part of my brain screaming to turn back. Sasha swallowed hard, but didn't speak, her free hand hovering near my arm as though bracing for what we might find below. I took the first step down, the metal railing slick under my palm. The dark below seemed to breathe, exhaling cold into our faces. Somewhere beneath us, deep in that black, a faint sound echoed, metal scraping against concrete, followed by something heavy shifting in the distance. The staircase emptied us into a wide, low-ceilinged corridor, lined with flaking cinder-block walls. The air was damp and clung to my skin, heavy with the reek of mold and rot. Our lights swept ahead, catching puddles that reflected in warped glimmers and the occasional glint of rusted pipes snaking along the walls. Considering the size of the mall, I assumed that the basement was extensive, an endless maze of dark hallways, storage, and maintenance rooms. Corridors branched off in both directions, some sloping slightly downward, others swallowed in pitch black. Doors hung ajar, leading into storage rooms littered with broken shelving, discarded crates, and heaps of damp cardboard that squelched underfoot. Somewhere far off, the faint metallic groan of shifting ductwork echoed, followed by a distant, muffled shout. Sasha froze mid-step, the light from her phone jerking upward to paint a trembling halo on the wall. "That was Javvon," she whispered, her voice thin and tight with fear, her words almost swallowed by the heavy air. Before I could respond, 2 gunshots erupted, sharp, ear-splitting cracks that bounced from wall to wall until it felt like the sound was pressing in on us, followed almost immediately by a ragged, high-pitched scream. It wasn't anywhere close and seemed heavily warped by distance and echo. My pulse kicked into overdrive, and I saw Sasha's eyes go wide, her knuckles whitening around the phone as if she could hold on to the light itself for protection. At least we now knew that Javvon was indeed here somewhere. We pushed deeper into the basement, our mismatched beams playing across peeling paint and grimy concrete. The deeper we went, the more the smell changed, layering the stench of rot and urine with something musky, animal, and overpoweringly rank. It coated the back of my throat. We moved from corridor to corridor, checking each room one by one. At every doorway, I would angle my flashlight in first, letting the beam sweep over cracked concrete, collapsed shelving, and heaps of unidentifiable debris, while Sasha's weaker phone light darted in behind mine. Most rooms were empty, but smelled of mildew and old trash, the kind of air that seemed to cling to your skin. Every step was accompanied by the sense of being watched. More than once I thought I caught movement ahead, just a shadow slipping behind a corner, or the faintest reflection of eyes that vanished the instant I turned my light on them. Or maybe I was just imagining it all. Then, from somewhere deep in the maze ahead, came a low, drawn-out moan. It was deep and ragged, as if forced from a broken, wounded chest, vibrating faintly through the concrete walls. The sound was far enough away that we couldn't pinpoint it, yet close enough to send a cold ripple down my spine. Sasha's eyes locked on mine, wide and questioning, and I could see her throat tighten as she swallowed. Something was down here with us. Not just Javvon and his brother. Whatever had made that sound wasn't a person. We turned a corner and came to another heavy door, bent and hanging open on one hinge. Inside was what had once been a locker room, but now it looked more like the lair of some wild predator. The tiled floor was almost entirely buried under a chaotic sprawl of filth and detritus. Bones, thick, large ones, many cracked open for the marrow, were strewn across the floor, their greasy sheen catching and reflecting our lights in sickly glints. Rotting meat was stacked in rancid heaps among a nest of tarps, rags, and flattened cardboard. The whole foul arrangement saturated with a musky, nauseating scent so strong it coated the back of my throat. The odor was oppressive, primal, animal. The sheer size of the bones and the violence of the marks made my stomach knot. Whatever lived here was able to take down even large dogs, far larger than the one it had dragged away earlier that day. This locker room was the lair of a serious predator. There were more signs. As I scanned the room, I noticed something around the door. Claw marks, etched deep into the old concrete wall. The gouges came in sets of 4, with a 5th one slightly offset, as if made by a thumb. They were spaced widely, each groove broad and uneven, indicating a large, powerful hand. disturbingly similar to that of a person. The realization crawled up my spine and settled there, heavy and cold. I didn't like that at all. Among the clutter in the corner, I spotted a few rusted metal poles leaning against a broken bench. Instinctively, I walked over and grabbed one, the weight unbalanced and the surface rough in my hands. It felt vastly inadequate against whatever could leave those marks, but I held onto it anyway, my grip tightening, as if that alone could make it enough. I wanted nothing more than to get out of there. Every nerve in my body screamed to turn and run, to put as much distance as possible between us and that stinking, bone-strewn den. My chest felt tight, my heartbeat loud in my ears. We backed out slowly, each step deliberate, the rubber soles of our shoes whispering against the grime-coated tile. I could feel Sasha trembling beside me, her breath quick and shallow. As we stepped into the main corridor again, a distant flicker of movement sliced through the beam of my flashlight and caught my eye, freezing me in place. At the far end, something like a massive shadow slid behind a corner. I kept my flashlight trained in that direction, straining my eyes, trying to force the darkness away. Then, after a few tense seconds, the beam caught something. Two tiny lights staring back at me from the darkness, about 70 feet away. Eyes, reflective eyes, at least 6 feet off the ground. Realizing what that meant, I almost pissed myself right then and there, but I kept staring. As my eyes adjusted, more disturbing details emerged. The glint of wet teeth under a thick, elongated muzzle, attached to a bulky, hunched shape bristling with what looked like thick, dark fur. I tried to take in every detail, my heart hammering, my breath shallow and fast. This couldn't be, but no matter how many times I blinked, it was still there. Then it came, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to roll out from deep inside the darkness, vibrating through the air and right into my bones. I had never been so scared in my life, not even close. After a few seconds, it moved, slipping away like smoke. It was gone, swallowed by the dark. The brief glimpse was enough to hollow me out inside. I couldn't deny it any longer. My mind screamed one word: werewolf. Beside me, Sasha let out a strangled sob and pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling as her breath hitched in the gloom. The growl faded into the dark, replaced by an awful stillness that pressed in from every direction. But it barely lasted 5 seconds. Then, bang! A gunshot cracked the air, so close it made my ears ring. Another followed a second later, echoing from just around the corner where the werewolf had vanished. The shots were sharp, panicked, and far too near. Sasha gasped, her voice breaking. "That's them, has to be!" A scream ripped through the corridors before I could answer, high and raw, the kind of sound you only make when something is tearing you apart. Then another voice, shouting incoherently, ragged with terror. I didn't think. I just ran. Sneakers pounding the filthy concrete. My flashlight beam swung wildly as I surged ahead. Sasha's footsteps followed close behind. As I rounded the corner, my light caught 3 figures at the end of a wide hallway, about 100 feet away. Javvon was there, gun in hand. He was half supporting a taller, lanky man, maybe his brother, who was limping badly. Beside them, a third man, a Latino by the looks of it, clutched his chest, dark fluid seeping through his fingers, his face twisted in pain. They were standing next to a metal door, still swinging on its hinges, as if something had just broken through it. The shadows beyond it seemed to breathe, and for a moment, I thought I heard the scrape of claws on concrete from somewhere inside. Then it came, a howl so loud and powerful it felt like the air itself was tearing apart. A bone-deep, feral wail that rattled my teeth and made every muscle in my body lock tight. It was far too close for comfort. Sasha's voice rang out, cutting through the echo of the howl. "Javvon!" she shouted, her tone cracking under the strain. The 3 men turned their heads, relief flashing briefly in Javvon's eyes. Slowly, unsteadily, they began limping toward us, the sound of their uneven steps mingling with the distant drip of water and the pounding of my heartbeat. They had barely passed the swinging door when something slammed into the Latino from behind, with bone-jarring force, knocking him forward to the floor. In a blur of motion, Javvon and his brother were hurled sideways against the wall. From behind the door's shadow, the massive silhouette of the werewolf emerged, its hunched bulk blotting out what little light there was. A clawed hand, long fingers, thumb set wide, came down on the thrashing Latino's back, pinning him to the ground. The creature stepped forward and over him, looking directly at us. Once again, it growled, a deep, vibrating snarl that told us in no uncertain terms not to interfere. The man on the ground screamed in pure agony as the claws dug deep into his flesh, his cry breaking into desperate sobs. Then, with terrifying ease, the werewolf seized his lower leg and dragged him away around the swinging door, the sound of his cries fading into the dark. Javvon and his brother scrambled away from the open door, limping as fast as their injuries allowed toward Sasha and me, their faces pale and eyes darting to every shadow. Instinct took over, and the four of us turned in unison, the sound of our ragged breathing echoing in the narrow hall as we began a frantic retreat toward the staircase we had come down earlier. In my mind, I could see it, an open escape, maybe 500 feet away. The air felt hotter, thicker, as though the walls themselves were closing in. We barreled forward, not thinking clearly. The basement was a maze, and panic does strange things to people. After rounding a few corners, the corridor ended abruptly in a stained concrete wall, the oppressive silence pressing in as I realized that we had taken a wrong turn somewhere. I forced myself to try to stay calm, though my pulse was thundering in my ears. Everyone was staring expectantly. This one was on me. I spun around to backtrack, but before I could take a step, a side door exploded inward with a metallic crash that reverberated through the hallway. A massive figure burst through in a blur of motion, a dark, furry, hunched shadow that seemed too big to even fit through the doorway. The heavy steel door slammed into me with crushing force. Pain flared through my side as I flew sideways into the wall. Then I hit the floor, hard, the impact rattling my skull and knocking the air from my lungs in a choking gasp. The pole I had held onto before dropped to the ground, just out of reach. Not that I would have been able to do anything with it at that moment anyway. The smell of rank, musky fur filled my nostrils as the massive shape loomed over me for a heartbeat before turning its attention elsewhere. Chaos erupted. Javvon began firing wildly, his muzzle flashes carving brief images of the beast into the darkness. The sound of the shots was deafening. It took every ounce of strength and focus just to turn my head to get a glimpse of what was happening. Javvon was in a panic, barely able to hold the gun. Several shots went wide as he desperately held on to the tiny pistol, but I knew that at least one bullet had hit the creature's shoulder, which suddenly jerked violently, and a cry of pain erupted from its throat. The creature roared and still managed to swat Javvon aside, its clawed hand raking deep furrows across his chest and shoulder. As Javvon collapsed, now also screaming in pain, the werewolf turned on Sasha, who was behind Javvon. She managed to dodge the first swipe, but stumbled on the second and went down hard. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself up, every muscle screaming in protest, and seized the rusted metal pole I'd taken earlier from the locker room that the creature had chosen as its lair. My legs felt like lead, my balance wavering with each step, but adrenaline shoved me forward. The beast was mid-swing at Sasha when I closed the gap, and I brought the pole down with a two-handed blow, striking the back of its head. The werewolf yelped, then snapped around toward me instantly, muzzle slick with saliva and streaked with gore, its eyes glinting with murderous intent. Before it could swipe or lunge at me, I screamed and drove the pole straight into its eye socket, feeling the sickening resistance give way beneath the force of my weight and momentum. The creature screamed, a shrill, guttural sound that made the walls seem to tremble, thrashing violently as its claws flailed and tried to grab the embedded pole. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Javvon's brother snatch up the gun, his hands shaking as he leveled it at the beast. He squeezed the trigger, once, twice, the first shot going wide, the second striking true and punching into the beast's torso with a dull, meaty thud. The impact made the werewolf stagger backward a step, another strangled snarl bursting from its throat. He kept pulling the trigger, face twisted in desperation, but the weapon answered only with the hollow click of an empty chamber. But it was enough. The gunshot and the pole in its eye seemed to have finally pushed it past the point of fury into something else, self-preservation. Still howling, the creature reeled back a few staggering steps, its massive frame shuddering. It backed away with its strange, limping gait, one hand still clawing at the pole protruding from its ruined eye. The sound it made was a raw, animal snarl laced with pain, echoing off the walls as it slipped into the shadows. We didn't wait. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, and I happily obeyed. So did the others. We were dragging and steadying one another as we limped for the staircase, our footsteps ragged and uneven, hearts pounding in unison with the fading thunder of its retreat. After a few minutes, we finally reached the staircase that led out of that goddamned labyrinth of a basement. We scrambled up the stairs, stumbled the remaining 200 feet to the foyer, and then, after what seemed like an eternity, spilled out into the night. We ran straight to my car, which, thank the Lord, was still where I had left it. Once inside, we were gasping for air, every one of us bloodied and shaking in fear and pain. Just as I turned the key, the engine's smooth, low rumble was met by another sound, rising from somewhere far below in the depths of the mall. It was a long, echoing howl, drawn out and shuddering, carrying the unmistakable tone of something wounded yet defiant. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, whatever it was, it had survived. We had gotten away this time, but the nightmare wasn't over. This thing is still down there. It will heal, and then it might come back to haunt us again.